Welcome to Etymologies of Care, a podcast about how language, awareness, culture, and relationship shape the way we exist in the world. I'm Paul Lichtenberg, and after more than 30 years as a clinical psychologist, I've learned that the most powerful changes occur not in isolation, but in meaningful, authentic relationships and how we think and express them. Here, we explore different ways of understanding and practicing care, from nervous system regulation to emotional development, to generating positive core beliefs, to spiritual fulfillment, to the power of authentic relating and community. Our hope is not to give you answers or solve seemingly incommensurate problems, but to spark curiosity in conversations that elevate awareness to help us all see ourselves and each other more clearly, more carefully. So let's begin. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Etymologies of Care. This week, I had an experience that perfectly illustrates what we're exploring today: the difference between technique-based therapy and relationship-based healing. I met with a therapist who was feeling stuck with a client. He said, "I've tried cognitive behavioral techniques, mindfulness interventions, and even some somatic approaches, but nothing seems to be working. What technique should I try next?" I found myself asking a different question. What's happening between you and your client right now? What does the relationship feel like in the room? As we talked further, it became clear that he was understandably so focused on applying the right intervention that he might have missed some deeper dynamics occurring in the relationship. The idea of stuck feels old and embedded in traditional models. The stuckness revealed something important. Both he and his client had been waiting for the right intervention to fix the problem, to reduce the symptoms, when the healing was actually asking them, inviting them to attend to what was happening between them. And so this is the heart of what we're exploring today: how relationship itself becomes the primary medium for transformation. Today I'm joined by my dear friend Lauren Barragan, a newly licensed social worker currently practicing psychotherapy in Westchester County, New York. What makes Lauren's perspective unique is that she was instrumental in developing integrative relational health from its earliest stages, along with Marissa Jackson and me, our core team. As an undergraduate researcher, Lauren helped uncover something crucial. Organizations claiming integrative care were often just adding complementary services: yoga, acupuncture, nutrition. While many were doing valuable work adding complementary services or emphasizing therapeutic relationships, we noticed a gap. We questioned in their languaging whether combining these approaches occurred within a framework that understood distress as emerging from relational conditions rather than individual pathology. Do they still locate problems within isolated minds? To be clear, the intention and integrity of relational connection was not in doubt. Our searching was deeper. What our research revealed during that early period was that these organizations tended to use integrative or relational as marketing language without the paradigm shift that makes integrative relational health fundamentally different. IRH recognizes that distress itself emerges from relational conditions, that what we call symptoms are often intelligent responses to genuine disturbances in our connections with ourselves, others, and our environments, and most pronounced in culture itself. And so Lauren brings this dual perspective. She helped create the conceptual models of IRH, and now she's discovering what it means to practice these principles in the real world. Hi, Lauren, and welcome. Let me start with this question. What do you think about the title, Etymologies of Care?
Well, hi, Paul. Good morning. It's so great to be here. Um, I think when I first heard etymologies of care, I thought it was brilliant, but also a little bit intimidating. Like, are we going to need Greek and Latin dictionaries? But I guess what I've come to understand is that it's really about excavating what's hidden in the language we use every day.
Hmm.
When I was doing that undergraduate research, looking at how organizations used integrative and relational, I was essentially doing etymology without knowing it.
Ha.
I was right. I
Yeah.
was tracing how these words had been emptied of their original meaning and turned into marketing buzzwords.
Hmm.
So for me, the title captures exactly what we're trying to do. Not just understand care intellectually, but trace it back to its roots. Care itself comes from the Old English carew, meaning sorrow or anxiety, which connects to being curious about suffering. It's not about applying techniques or managing symptoms. It's about the quality of genuine attention and concern. And the plural of etymologies matters. This isn't just one story about how we came to understand care. Different cultures, different languages, different historical moments have created different frameworks. The work that we must do is learning to navigate between them without requiring them to collapse into one right way. So the title tells you what the podcast is. It's not going to give you 5 techniques for better mental health. It's
Hmm.
going to ask you to look at how the very language you're using might be shaping what you can see and what remains invisible.
Hmm. Beautiful. Beautiful. Lauren, I want our listeners to understand your unique journey. You weren't just learning IRH, you were helping to build and actually embody it. What we hope to make clear today is that the integrative approach recognizes that symptoms emerge from complex interdependent conditions operating across multiple functional levels and considers them all over time as you are building relationship. IRH recognizes them as aspects of a single relational field, but changes at any level cascade through the entire system, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, a
Mhm.
client comes into therapy seeking support for significant anxiety. The first thing we recognize is that the anxiety, in some ways, holds the body's wisdom.
Yep.
We approach it not as a problem, but as adaptation, even self-protection.
Yep.
That's multiple. That's a true shift right there. The pathways for connection and wholeness were perhaps in many ways blocked. There were real challenges for the client, and symptom reduction is a part of a more complex healing process. Notice the language, right?
Absolutely. I think when I hear you say that,
Mhm.
especially the idea that anxiety being the symptom in some ways holds the body's wisdom, oftentimes we have to think about the symptoms that people around us experience, we ourselves experience,
Mhm.
serve a specific function.
Mhm.
The symptom, be it anxiety, is something that we've learned along the way and was created, born from usually a relational rupture.
Yeah, beautiful. So, staying with our early research, right? When you notice the way organizations were using integrative or relational without the paradigm shift that makes them transformative together, can you explain what you discovered and, even more importantly, what you felt? And I know it was very early back then, before our conceptual frame was getting more and more coherent. So, knowing what you now know, how is integrative relational health fundamentally different from either integrative approaches or relational approaches separately?
Great question. And I appreciate you calling back how early this was in our process working together, but also in my understanding and sort of entry into the clinical field. This was kind of my access point into
Yeah.
therapy, clinical psychology, and
Yeah.
exactly what does that look like and how is language used.
Yeah. And let's not forget, you were an undergraduate. let's just
Yeah,
be let's be clear about in your own developmental process. It's
exactly.
pretty magnificent, right?
Exactly. And so seeing integrative everywhere and relational. I think the big thing, especially that you and I have talked about, is oftentimes seeing integrative standalone or relational standalone. And I remember there were times also where I would be digging. Okay, well, what does integrative mean to this person? And what does integrative mean to that person?
Mhm.
And then seeing that there were some similarities, but also that there were differences. And so ways that the same word can be taken and
Mhm.
then also embodied differently and practiced differently in the field.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what is so significant with IRH is the descriptive language that is used to fully make sense of both integrative and relational psychotherapy and health
Mhm.
all in one.
Yeah.
If you look at the website, Integrative Relational Health has there's such descriptive language about what that means in terms of culture, what
Mm.
that means in terms of the different relationships that we have throughout the span of a lifetime, and also what that means intergenerationally. And so there are all these aspects of IRH that are embedded within the website that people then can pick and choose which aspects they identify with at the time.
Mm.
So I think that something really unique about IRH is bringing in the interconnected aspect of relationship
Yeah.
and being very explicit about what that might look like to different people.
Yeah. There's that word explicit that we'll come back to because it's so, so crucial in communication and understanding. So, this is so important for listeners to understand that most integrative approaches add complementary services, but still locate the problem within the isolated individual, right? Most relational approaches emphasize connection, but still treat symptoms as individual pathology. As you pointed out, IRH does something completely different. It recognizes that distress emerges from relational conditions, and that what we call symptoms are often intelligent responses to genuine disturbances in the relational field, what you said, ruptures. And those coherent responses point to many relational contexts. Really important here, many relational contexts across individual, relational, and cultural systems, right? That's a
Yeah.
whole episode. That's a whole 5 episodes right there that
Mm-hmm.
we will get to.
Yep.
My question, what was that realization like for you?
It is a big question. And it's funny because the question is large and it is vast. And yet, talking about this topic, although so, it encompasses so much of who a person is, right? Having to think about your relationship to yourself, your relationship to your family members, your friends, and also your relationships and how they exist within cultural systems.
Mm.
And yet there is something so comforting about the fact that you asked,
Ah,
because it's something that isn't talked about enough.
yeah,
And I think the realization for me was, okay, whoa, this idea of relational health is massive, and yet it's asking all the questions that I've been wanting somebody to ask, or it's asking all the questions that I've been thinking about,
mm-hmm.
but that there's no space to engage
Yeah,
in conversation around. Um, and you're right. I mean, it's all of these topics in and of themselves take time to fully get into and to fully develop.
yeah,
But there is something so, it puts me at peace and it puts me at ease knowing that they're conversations that other people want to be having.
yeah. And that is the source, right, of IRH. We can call IRH a conversation itself, right?
Yeah.
An opening to conversation. And it's a conversation that we all need to have. And not just that we need to have, but we desire, as you say, that we desire
Yeah.
to have it, and the comfort it brings us and the connection it brings us, right?
And that in and of itself is
Yeah.
healing.
Yes. Yes.
That's the
Absolutely. So simple and so complex.
yeah.
We honor both. Okay, so now you're implementing, if we can use that word. I'd like to use another word, but we're going to use that word for now. Now you're implementing what we developed together.
Yeah.
What surprises you about the translation from another great question? What
Right.
surprises you about the translation from theory to practice? Like, we spent years now, it's like 4 years now, developing in concept development with Marissa. And we're now translating these concepts into programs. And now you're translating these concepts um, into your work as a psychotherapist.
Yeah. I think another big question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'll get to this also the more we continue to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what surprises me is how deeply aware I am of IRH, and also how simultaneously when you're in a new environment or you're trying to develop a new skill,
Mm-hmm.
how easily our culture and our systems are set up in a way that makes it difficult. Sometimes I'm finding to recall that innate awareness and innate knowledge
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
IRH.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In a later episode, we're going to talk about what blocks care.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
What blocks care doesn't mean that it's a problem or there's something wrong with us in the blocking. This is a cultural phenomenon
Exactly.
that we need to bring into conversation so that we can bring into awareness, right? As
Exactly.
as we shift this paradigm.
Right. And I think as I hear you say that, I think maybe what surprises me more specifically is like the delicate balancing act I feel like I'm doing sometimes to hold certain systems in place that are necessary in care and are part of the medical system,
Yeah.
while also delicately balancing the relationship.
Mm,
And I think maybe I didn't think it was going to require that much attention.
yeah.
Maybe I was hopeful. I'm young, remember? But I'm realizing it's a lot of active, it's a lot of active work to continue to center IRH in practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you know, what I'm feeling even in today's episode, which I feel all the time in our work, is this beautiful spiraling between the thinking and the theory and the practice. And so
Yeah.
right now, I want to zoom out if we can for a moment and take a
Yeah.
look at the meta view. And the reason why I want to do that is because of this word paradigm, right? And so here's a nice historical and etymological moment. Folks often ask, Paul, what do you mean by paradigm shift? It's such a beautiful question, right? So historically, originally, paradigm meant a pattern or model to be copied. In the early 60s, the philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, transformed the construct of paradigm. In his 1962 work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Kuhn used paradigm to describe the entire constellation of beliefs, values, and techniques shared by members of a scientific community. Not just individual theories, but the underlying worldview that determines what questions can be asked and what counts as valid knowledge. The paradigm shift is from understanding human beings as isolated individuals who relate to recognizing that we are fundamentally relational beings whose very identity, well-being, and distress emerge through the quality of our connections. So this no doubt will sound obvious to many listeners, and for a good reason. Your bodies already intuitively know this, but primarily binary and analytic language models of our culture and systems of care, as you just pointed out, Lauren, often contradict that truth. And that contradiction has profound consequences, especially in the healing process, creating this kind of split mind, this split consciousness between what we intuitively know and how we naturally function and the language of our culture. Yeah. So this etymological shift is itself significant for our work, right?
Absolutely.
So applying that to mental health, the shift from mental health to relational health represents what Kuhn called a paradigm shift. Not just adopting new techniques or theories, but transforming the fundamental assumptions about what human beings are and how healing occurs. The traditional mental health paradigm makes certain things visible, like individual pathology or expert intervention, while rendering other core elements of change invisible, like relational constitution and field dynamics. This new paradigm, what we are working with, reveals what was always present but couldn't be seen through the previous or the current, the traditional mental health framework. Why we say, for example, there is nothing wrong with you. What we mean by that is there is nothing inherently wrong with you.
Yes.
This connects our etymological methodology, excavating, as you said, how words carry hidden assumptions that shape reality, just as paradigms shape what can be thought and perceived. So now, in your graduate training, you were taught to become ultimately an expert applying techniques. And you were simultaneously developing IRH's relational framing, integrative relational framing. Right? How do you navigate between these different understandings of what a therapist is? And by the way, I do recall that through your IRH work, you noticed in your graduate program the very paradigm shifts that we're describing. You remember that when you shared with me, like you've noticed, like, in my program, I'm seeing the changes.
Yeah,
We actually
absolutely.
are talking about the changes. It's still not, it's still very underdeveloped or undeveloped, if you will. I am noticing the changes. And you were noticing the changes because you were already bringing into your own awareness what those changes are.
Absolutely. And I think the core of it, which I appreciate so much from my social work experience and my social work degree, is they were really honing in this idea that you talked about, that there is nothing inherently wrong with
Mm,
anyone. There isn't. And the things that we experience are all products of the symptoms that we experience, are
hmm
products of
hmm
events that we've experienced, conversations that we've had, um, conversations that we weren't allowed to have,
mm,
which all really at the center was the client or anyone is the expert of their own lived experience.
mm.
And I think that having that message in school helped me to bridge these different ideas of what it means to be a therapist,
Yeah,
because they were already bridging. Okay, so you have techniques, you have things in your toolbox, and also there's a way that you're going to go about implementing these tools in your toolbox.
yeah.
There's also a way that we want you to understand that one tool is not going to work for everybody,
Mm,
and that each person that you see is a different person, and involving them also in choice around technique and choice around the tools that are used. A lot of transparency, a lot of teamwork, working together, and
collaboration.
really
Hmm
thank you.
hmm
Collaboration,
Yeah.
which is another pillar of IRH, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Um,
Hmm
and I think that, inherently in the history of psychotherapy, that hasn't always been the case. And I think in this role, it's important to also understand that because that's the history of this role, that it is often something that when we embody this role, we can revert to or take on.
Yeah.
And it's important to be aware of that
hmm
and to continue to be as collaborative as possible.
Yeah. I love what you're sharing because you're bringing into really sharp relief here these two paradigms. One that is really focusing on symptom reduction, right? It's almost a kind of objectification of the human being against this paradigm of healing that could only occur within the relationship, right? You could just feel that difference. And so I'm wondering, in your actual work, um,
Yeah.
right? Can you share a specific moment when you shifted from trying to apply a technique, so to speak, to actually understanding someone's experience as relationally constituted?
Mm.
I'm sure there are many of those experiences. I'm just
Right.
curious if you could perhaps share one.
Yeah. That is a great question. And I think something that comes to mind is an experience or two that I had in my second year internship.
Mm-hmm.
And in my second year internship, I was doing a lot of trauma work. And, I was taught different techniques. I went through specific training. Um, there was TFCBT training, implementing a lot of trauma informed care.
Yeah.
And I think that there was a moment where I realized that this person who I was talking to every week was really struggling within current relationships due to trauma from past relationships.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I realized I did utilize technique, right?
Yes, of
But I
course.
think,
Hmm.
right. But of course, like what was most significant was showing up. We had like the standing appointment, her knowing that she could count on me to
Mm-hmm.
be there,
Mm-hmm.
to talk about things that she had never been able to really talk about to someone about before.
Right.
Building this trust, this vulnerability, this empathetic attunement to validate her experiences. And it's so interesting because at the end
Yeah.
of our sessions together, when I was graduating, we went through assessments and she did not have a PTSD diagnosis anymore. And I kind of, asked her to reflect a little bit about
Mm.
what, you know, how how were things and what do you feel like contributed to this real decrease in symptoms?
Beautiful question.
And she said, honestly, I don't know what we did here. And at first I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, well, she can't pinpoint what we did. But I think it spoke to this relational dynamic
Yeah.
that sometimes we don't have words for. Like
Yeah. Well,
when
well, I,
something is,
I can give you the words right now because it's so clear, especially knowing you.
yeah,
You cared so deeply for her. And that is what came through. No doubt. Right?
yeah. And so I think navigate like using you can use all the techniques, you can have them in your toolbox, you can work collaboratively, but just like how you and I know when we're talking to somebody and whether or not it seems like they care,
Mm-hmm.
everybody has that. Everybody knows what it feels like to to feel like, oh, they're not really listening or they're not really understanding. And like we can understand we all as human beings understand the difference. And I think that being able to provide that care in a way that people that you're working with can really feel
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
is the difference.
Yeah. And I think there's another, as a matter of fact, I know that there's another piece that came out in this example in terms of what you are conveying to clients. And what you are conveying to clients is a core idea in IRH that there is nothing wrong with you, right?
Nothing.
And I want to be clear about that statement because it could be reduced or simplified. So I want to be clear about what this means. There is nothing wrong with you because it's actually pretty easy to misunderstand. We're not
Mm,
saying that people don't need help or support. When someone is experiencing suicidal ideation, psychotic breaks, or crisis level distress, they absolutely need intervention and sometimes medication, sometimes hospitalization or intensive support.
yeah.
What we're simply saying here is that these responses, while they may require immediate care, often represent the psyche's intelligent attempt at coherence under impossible relational conditions, right? And so an integrative approach might address your whole person, body, mind, spirit, and still sees you, right? But I'm sorry, so let's just change that, but does not see you as broken or needing fixing. A relational
Yeah.
approach might emphasize connection, and still see your symptoms as an individual who is experiencing this distress. IRH recognizes that distress itself, again, emerges from relational field conditions, and that what's called symptoms are often the system itself doing exactly what it should do when relational conditions are compromised. So how does that distinction land with you now that you're practicing? How do you hold both the intelligence of symptoms and the reality that people need support and relief? Right? That dialectic there is important.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
we're not saying either or. This is not a binary model.
No, both are true.
Okay.
Both are absolutely true. And so I think, right, people, there are moments where people, and we've talked about this too, right? When
Mm-hmm.
talking about the sort of the cycle, the force of therapy and like how it even begins. And oftentimes it begins with an individual's innate knowledge
Yeah.
that something's not right,
Mm-hmm.
that that's something that they want something to change, that they want to feel a different way, that they want to have a different way of being,
Mm-hmm.
that something that they're experiencing is not sitting well with them. And so I think this idea of people needing support and relief is absolutely present, and not even something, I mean, yes, something that we as clinicians hold, but something that many clients also hold. That's why they come in
Yes.
search of support and relief from certain feelings that maybe they've had in the past or haven't. And I think then what we must hold is that in this space of support and healing and relief is that these symptoms that we want relief from,
Yeah.
oftentimes they don't come out of thin air. They are rooted in experiences that together we will get to the bottom of, we will talk about together. And in doing so, in talking about the symptoms as a product of an experience, of a relational rupture,
Yeah.
that provides the support and relief. I
Yeah.
believe both. Our work is
Mm-hmm.
those two things coming together constantly.
Yeah. I want to ask you another interesting question. As a new therapist coming out of internship and graduating, right? How do you talk about IRH and supervision when your supervisor, for example, might be more traditionally trained? I know we've discussed this in the past. I would like you to share that a little bit. This kind of navigation.
Yeah. In so many ways, the supervisor and supervisee relationship is a mirror for the
Yes.
therapist and client
Yes, the
relationship.
same power dynamics, ostensibly. Yes.
Exactly. And so it's interesting, as therapists, you kind of are holding both roles,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Mm-hmm.
important to be able to, like you said, curiosity practice curiosity. That goes both ways, being curious with clients and their lived experience, but then also being curious about your supervisor and
Yeah.
their approaches and
Yeah.
what leans them towards certain techniques or what
Yeah.
leans them away from
Yeah.
certain techniques.
Yeah. It's not getting trapped in the binary that either they are correct and I am wrong, or right? Okay,
Exactly.
how do we integrate as a supervisee? How do I integrate these different frames of reference? What can I learn from a frame that I actually might not agree with?
Exactly. And keeping in this idea that it's not binary, especially because
Mm-hmm.
any therapist is going to have multiple supervisors in their life.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important idea to be able to pull from
Mhm.
each, like your supervisors are pillars in your professional development as a
Yeah.
therapist.
Yeah.
And they're all different, and pulling from each of them in order to sort of integrate your own approach and your own understanding,
Yeah.
um, I think is also important.
Mhm. What's so cool about this here, we have roles, right? And we're talking about IRH principles, organizing principles that begin before we have identity and roles. These are
Yeah.
organizing principles of relationship, right?
Yeah.
And relational literacy and qualities of relating that apply even before we become a supervisee, even before we become a therapist. This is a core part of our work. And so this is actually a perfect example that, okay, so I'm in a different role now. I'm a supervisee and I have a supervisor, but I'm still applying the same principles.
Absolutely.
So that's really cool.
It really is cool. And I think that's also why, I mean, we've spent so much time also working on developing the,
Mm-hmm.
guidelines or sort of ways of being that are so important within the supervisee and supervisor relationship, because oftentimes it does not get nearly as much attention as
Yes,
client and therapist. Um,
for sure. For sure.
and yeah.
And getting a little deeper into the weeds, the very practical aspects, concrete aspects. What's it like to write treatment plans when you're focused
Ah,
when you're focusing on relational health rather than symptom reduction? To
mm,
those listeners who are therapists, this actually often comes up. It certainly comes up in supervision and group supervision. It's like, Paul, there's a lot of emotional labor in these details, and it does take away from what I would love to be part of. And this is also this administrative part of my life takes up a lot of time and energy.
yeah.
Right? So it's a really
Yeah.
important question, certainly for listeners out there who are therapists.
No, absolutely. And it's, the treatment plan is fully necessary. I haven't had any experience
Mm.
where, you know, I haven't written a treatment plan. The treatment plan is part of, the process of having therapy, implementing these goals, these objectives, the interventions. It's part of the medical system. It's part of what the focus of progress notes is. Because oftentimes the progress notes are rooted towards how is the progress with the goals.
Right.
And I think what I am finding personally, and I'd also love to hear what you think, but I am finding that the treatment plan and these smart goals and these objectives, they can be part of treatment, they can be part of therapy, and it can be part of what we talk about in a session. But if I have a session that's 40, 45 minutes long, I think it's important as the therapist to build in time dedicated to relationship.
Yeah.
Like, and while that might not be a SMART goal, it's inherently part of how we can even begin to achieve the goals, if that's really, what we want to do. Um, and so I think writing the treatment plan is also coupled with this idea of integrating techniques and um, relational healing.
Yeah.
And again, I think that gets back to what I was saying before. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance to be able to hold these goals, to be able to continue to check in on their progress while also being relational.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you're sharing here. And what comes to my mind when we think about treatment goals, because we all have really strong and often negative, if we're honest, negative feelings about it. I think what's most important is not the treatment goals themselves, but our relationship to the treatment goals as therapists.
Exactly.
No, in other words, how can I use this obligation, this necessary part of my job, my work?
Right.
How can I use this creatively? How can I use this to help me continue to organize my care? Organize
Yeah.
my care for this client. In the same way, when we do group supervision, for example, and we do presentations, we've rewritten the whole way we do presentations to make it more of a creative process. And so treatment goals aren't going anywhere,
No, they're not.
and they are necessary as part of this system.
Yeah.
What we need to do is not be resistant to them and feel inadequate and objectified. We need to explore our relationship to these treatment plans and make them more, as you would say, curious and creative.
Yeah.
That would be my first response.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that we have to explore our relationship to the
Yep.
treatment plan. And I think it's interesting because I think a different therapist at different stages of their career are going to think differently about it. I think
Yes.
as somebody who's new, I I kind of have a good relationship with the treatment plan.
Yeah.
I like having something that helps me organize care. I like having specific objectives that are, you know, proven objectives that are beneficial
Mm-hmm.
in treatment.
Yeah.
And then I think also, though, in that being my relationship to treatment goals, also leaving myself the room to be creative, to explore,
Mhm.
and to center these relational ideas that I do hold so dearly.
Yeah. And I would probably argue that the reason why you have a good relationship to treatment plans is because you're coming at therapy not from symptom reduction model, but you're coming at it from a relational model. So everything is infused with that principle or those principles, right? And so
Yeah.
you're bringing relationality into your treatment plans, which make it more in sync or aligned with who you are and how you function as a human being.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, right, the way they're written is not relational, but the way that they're practiced
Yeah.
absolutely is. It, you have to take what's on paper and do
Yeah.
a little bit of work.
Yeah. So let's circle back to people seeking therapy for a moment. How can they recognize if their therapist is working from a relational framework versus just applying techniques? I know it might sound
Mm,
like kind of obvious to us, but it's not necessarily obvious to someone new to therapy.
right. It's not. And it's
See,
interesting
so
too
this
because
that's why IRH work is not, we're not here just for therapists. You know what I'm saying? We're here for the general public, if you will, and for everyone in culture, inside of
yeah,
culture, right?
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think far too often, especially the power, like we referenced the power dynamic that exists in therapy.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes people new to therapy don't trust their intuition in that space. I mean, there are times, I mean, it can be therapy, has a medical model and it can feel like similarly, I mean, I have times where I go to the doctor and I feel extremely intimidated and I'm kind of feeling like I can't trust the way that I'm feeling because the person that I'm seeing is an expert.
Mm.
quote unquote, right?
Right.
And so,
Exactly.
and right, they are, but also I really want to encourage people, like, if this is your 10th time in therapy, if this is your first time in therapy, you are not only the expert of your lived experience, but you are, like, you have an innate intuition that tells you whether or not I want to phrase this delicately, but I want to encourage people to listen to their intuition when they meet with somebody,
Yeah.
and listen to not only like how you're feeling during the session. Are you feeling heard?
Mm-hmm.
Or does this relationship bring up something in the past that really doesn't feel good?
Yeah. Yeah.
And afterwards, also, I want to encourage people to check in with themselves and how it felt to be in the space with that person. Um,
Yeah. What you're sharing is inspiring me to do a whole episode on beginning therapy, actually. When one begins,
yeah,
that's something we should really explore, because
I think
you're,
so.
you're really making it so clear to me how important that is, you know?
Absolutely. And it's funny because there are like, there are times where it takes people multiple therapists to say, I've had bad experiences in therapy. It feels like my therapist is just clocking in and clocking out, is not really paying attention. Like, listen to those things. If that is what it feels like in session,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
then that relational approach isn't being used in the way that it can be, which again is not a direct criticism of certain of therapists, but speaks to the systemic burnout that
And
is present.
by the way, we've all experienced that, just so everyone knows. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Okay, so in the service of this episode, and much like a therapy session, we're coming down to the end, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for so much, for everything,
I
everything
want to
from the
thank
very
you.
beginning of our relationship. 4 years out, I can't believe it, Lauren. And I want
I know.
to thank you for sharing both your intellectual journey and your vulnerability, as always, about the learning process. Before we close, I want to emphasize something crucial for our listeners. Integrative relational health isn't just being nice to clients while offering multiple services. It's not adding yoga to therapy or emphasizing warm therapeutic alliance. It's recognizing that human beings are fundamentally relational, that our well being and our distress emerge from the quality of our connections across multiple levels simultaneously. This changes everything about how we understand healing. It means recognizing that what we call symptoms often represent intelligent responses to relational health conditions. And it means that healing happens through participating in the transformation of those conditions: cellular, psychological, social, cultural, trusting that the organism will naturally reorganize when the field shifts. But, and this is essential, recognizing the intelligence of symptoms doesn't mean people should suffer without support. Crisis intervention, medication, hospitalization when needed, when appropriate. These create the relational conditions that allow for deeper transformation. We honor both the wisdom of distress and the necessity of care. And for the listeners, these are your action steps this week. Notice relational context. Pay attention to the quality of connection itself, not just content being discussed. Practice authentic presence. In one conversation, experiment with being genuinely present rather than trying to fix or solve something. And subscribe and share. If this resonates, subscribe to Etymologies of Care and share with someone who might benefit. Thank you for joining me for Etymologies of Care. If today's conversation resonates, I invite you to share it and keep the dialogue alive in your own community. You can find resources, learn more about relational health, and connect with us at integrativerelationalhealth.com. Until next time, may you care for yourself and others